Okay, so up until now, we have seen how revolution has spread to it began in France, spread to Austria. It also spread to Germany in the spring of 1848. But what do we mean by Germany? I mentioned in earlier classes that there was no single united German state in Europe in the early modern period. So, what is Germany in 1839? Or sorry, in 1848? Essentially, there were 39 different German kingdoms that were very loosely aligned within the German Confederation. You might remember from the map exam that there was something called the German Federation you had to identify. This was created in 1815 by the Congress of Vienna to replace the old Holy Roman Empire. Basically, the German Confederation was a very, very loose alliance between the conservative kingdoms of Germany. There was a parliament that met in Frankfurt in which the German kingdoms sent their representatives to, and for the most part, it didn't have any power to enforce its rules upon the various German kingdoms. It was more an opportunity for German kings or German states to discuss areas of common interest. And how it had largely functioned since 1815 was that it had been a place in which conservative kings of Germany had discussed how to stop liberal reforms, potential liberal revolution, rebellion within their respective territories. So Germany in the 1840s had shared many similarities we saw elsewhere in Europe. We have German liberals in the various German kingdoms who want political reforms, usually the three core reforms of extended franchise, although usually not universal suffrage. So they wanted franchise for the middle classes, votes for the middle classes. Socialists and the working classes who wanted the government to do more to help deal with economic problems that led to unemployment and poverty for them. And German peasants who wanted to get rid of the old feudal obligations they had to labour under. So feudalism still existed in some German kingdoms in the sense that peasants oftentimes owed a duty of labour, i.e. a certain number of days every year in which they had to work for their lords in return for their right to farm their own lands. So various different groups want different things. And a final element that kind of the German political picture was nationalism. Unlike in Austria, where we have various nationalists who wanted to break away from the Austrian or from Austrian control, in Germany, liberal nationalists wanted to unite the various German kingdoms together as a single constitutional monarchy state. As revolution spread from France, it arrives in Germany in March 1848. And some of the small German kingdoms, in order to kind of stave off the demand for greater change and potential revolution, they agree to replace their conservative prime ministers, their conservative governments, with more liberal governments. So we see this in Württemberg, Hanover, Saxony. And in Bavaria, the king of Bavaria, a guy called Ludwig, tries to do something similar. Initially, he changes his government from conservative to liberal. But liberals demand more change in this, and in order to kind of stave off a potential uprising, Ludwig agrees to abdicate in favour of his son. So the various small German kingdoms try to meet the challenge of rebellion or potential liberal revolution by introducing some moderate liberal reforms. And we see something similar in the largest, most powerful and most conservative German kingdom, Prussia. In Prussia, Frederick William is the king. He takes some similar steps. He agrees to replace conservative ministers with liberal ministers. He promises a constitution will be introduced in the near future. And he also introduces laws granting free speech. However, a lot of people say that, well, this is not enough. We want more reforms now. In particular, they want the constitution to be introduced as soon as possible. Protests take place in Berlin in March of 1848, and they get out of hand. Soldiers try to order the crowds to disperse. The crowds begin erecting barricades to fortify themselves on the streets of Berlin instead, and the soldiers open fire and kill 250 people. And just as in France, just as in Austria, it is this overreaction by soldiers that leads to a massacre that creates a surge in demand for immediate change and puts further pressure on Frederick William. So he orders the soldiers to leave Prussia. He comes out, he makes some very vague promises about how he wants to try and create a united Germany, which is something that liberals wanted. And And he promises to introduce universal suffrage into this new Prussian parliament as well. He also allows the workers of Berlin to form their own National Guard, that is a militia to defend themselves against the Prussian state. So these are very, very radical concessions for a Prussian king to make. Meanwhile, across Germany, peasants, encouraged by what happens in Berlin, encouraged by what's happening across Europe, essentially begin overthrowing their own feudal obligations. They begin hunting on aristocratic hunting preserves, which they were traditionally forbidden from hunting on. Some of them refuse to show up for their labour obligations, and in some cases, peasants begin attacking the homes of aristocrats and forcing aristocrats to sign documents in which the aristocrats renounce forever their right to claim labour obligations from the peasants. So much so that some people in Germany worry that a potential peasant uprising is on the verge of breaking out. So lots of kind of political and social chaos in Germany in 1848, but many people in Germany hope that a unified Germany under a liberal constitutional monarchy in which peasant rights are fully respected is about to be created. Of course, I said the difference between nationalism in Germany and in Austria is that nationalism in Germany is a uniting force. It is pulling the various German kingdoms together. Liberals who wanted to unify Germany essentially create their own parliament. They start meeting in May of 1848. They call on all the representatives of the German kingdoms to send delegates to Frankfurt, where they can hammer out a new constitution that will be used to unite the various German kingdoms into one state. Essentially, they envision a grassroots movement in which Germany will be united from below, as opposed to being united from above by the decisions of the German kings. The main question in this parliament, so the parliament starts meeting in May of 1848. The very first question they begin to debate is, what do we mean when we say Germany? What becomes known as the Großdeutschland or Klein Deutschland question. That is the big Germany or the small Germany debate. And this debate was focused on Austria. Austria itself was mostly peopled by German speakers, but the Austrian Empire had a variety of different nationalities, as we've already seen: Czechs, Poles, Hungarians, Croats, various other Slavic groups. And the decision the Frankfurt Parliament makes is that they are willing to accept Austria as part of a united Germany, the Klein Deutschland, the smaller Germany, but not if it includes the various parts of the Austrian Empire in which German speakers are a minority. So Großdeutschland will be all the German kingdoms, including all of Austria. Klein Deutschland is the smaller Germany in which non-German speakers are excluded. That obviously wasn't of much interest to the Austrian monarchy, the Habsburgs. So when we say Klein Deutschland, that really suggests that Austria is not going to play any role in a united Germany. What is notable about the parliament is that it was very middle class, very bourgeois. 1/3 of the delegates were lawyers. The rest of the delegates were mostly other middle class professions, so doctors, university professors, bankers, business owners. They do little to win the support of the masses in Germany, that is the working classes of the German cities or the peasants of the German countryside. One of the delegates says that universal suffrage is the most radical and dangerous experiment in human history, an idea that is not really going to win the support of the working classes who tend to support universal suffrage. They recognize the rights of peasants to throw off their feudal obligations, but the Frankfurt Parliament insists that these peasants must pay financial compensation to their lords. In other words, if you as a peasant are no longer going to submit to the feudal labour obligation that is on you, that's okay, but you have to pay your landlord with money in order to compensate him. An idea that's not going to win much support amongst the working classes, amongst the peasants of Germany. However, for all this idea of a united Germany, and for all the idea that it can be pulled together by the grassroots, it still needs the support of Frederick William, the King of Prussia. Prussia is simply the largest military state amongst German kingdoms. If Frederick William accepts it, his military power, combined with the demands of liberals in the other German kingdoms, will probably be enough to pull the German kingdoms together into a single kingdom under Frederick William. And so in December 1848, the nationalists in the Frankfurt Parliament offered a crown to Frederick William, and his response is to reject it. He basically says this is a crown from the gutter, it's a dog collar, it smells or stinks of revolution, he will not accept it, and at a stroke essentially kills off the effort to unite Germany as one kingdom in 1848. You might wonder, why exactly did Frederick William reject the crown? Very simply, as a conservative monarch, he believed he owed his right to rule to God. It was a divine, God-given idea. He was worried that if he accepted the crown from the Frankfurt Parliament, that would imply somehow that he owed the crown to the people, owed the crown to the working, or owed the crown to the Parliament, and that was simply a symbolic gesture that he was not comfortable with. So he rejects the unification of Germany as offered by the Frankfurt Parliament. Meanwhile, the following year, he introduces his own constitution that he had promised in the spring of 1848. But the constitution itself was actually quite conservative. He firstly rolls back the liberal demands or liberal reforms he introduced. So he removes the right of the workers of Berlin to have their own national guard. He removes the free speech laws he had introduced the previous year. And he does preserve universal suffrage in the new Prussian Parliament, but he does so in a way that makes it essentially meaningless. Frederick William announces that 1/3 of the Prussian Parliament will be elected by the wealthiest 3% of Prussian landowners. The next third will be elected by the next 10%, wealthiest 10% of the Prussian population. And then the final third will be elected by the remaining 87% of the Prussian population. So it's going to remain a universal suffrage, but we might have universal suffrage in quotation marks, because in reality, all power remains in the hands of the king and the wealthy landowning elite in Prussia. So for all the hopes of various liberals and nationalists in Germany in 1848, that they would unite Germany, that they would make Germany a constitutional monarchy in which liberals would have a real say in the running of the government, those dreams are dead by the spring of 1849.